So I get a lot of pushback whenever I talk about writing covered calls for cash flow in your dividend portfolio. Chief among those concerns is, hey Joe, you're forgetting about all the times the market goes up and you miss out on all the capital appreciation. Now I can appreciate that feedback, but if you want the truth, you know, facts. Writing covered calls beats the index. Let me show you. Let me introduce you to two very important indexes which track historical performance back to 1986. I'm going to make the wild assumption that 32 years of history is sufficient for you guys. The first index is the SPX, which is the official S&P 500 index from S&P Global. Most average Joe investors actually think that SPY is the official S&P 500 index, but in reality, SPY is just the biggest ETF that tracks SPX. It tracks the historical total returns for the S&P 500 all the way back to March 4th, technically, of 1957. The second index is BXMD, which is the CBOE. For the record, CBOE stands for Chicago Board Options Exchange. The CBOE S&P 500 30 Delta BuyWrite Index. Allow me a little bit of time here to properly explain exactly what this index is trying to accomplish. There's a few things going on here. First off, S&P 500, meaning that is the underlying index that is owned. Then we have 30 Delta, which speaks to the options strategy, and we'll get to that in a second. Then we have BuyWrite Index, meaning that we are owning the underlying investment, the S&P 500, and then we are writing covered call option contracts against our holdings. Specifically here on the website, they say that this index is a variation of the CBOE BuyWrite Index, BXM, that tracks the value of a hypothetical portfolio that overlays a short 30 Delta call option on the S&P 500 instead of an at-the-money option. The very simple and straightforward way to explain this is, number one, you own the S&P 500 index. Number two, we are writing covered calls on that holding. Number three, we are writing those options out of the money, which remember means that we are gaining both capital appreciation and we're capturing option premium because that option strike price we're using is out of the money. How far out of the money? A 30 delta. All of the different strike prices out there have a specific delta which measures how much the price of that option changes against the actual price of the stock. So for example, here's the S&P 500 SPY option chain. And you'll notice here right in this section there are deltas. For example, let's look at the $417 strike price right here, expiring in 31 days. It has a delta of 0.4247. For your awareness, these numbers are constantly changing. This is just a moment in time. For example, if I hit the refresh right here, you'll see that this changes. See, now it's down to 0.4195. It's constantly being changed. What this number reflects is for every dollar change in the price, right up here, $411.50, for every dollar change, the price of this option right over here will change by 41 cents or 42 cents. This delta up here, 0.58, means that for every dollar change in the actual price of the stock, the price of the option would change by 58 cents. And consequently down here at the farther out of the money strike price, 423, it only has a 26 delta, means that for every dollar change in the price right now currently, it would only change this price by 26 cents. But again, these numbers are always changing. Specifically in this strategy, they would look at a 30 delta or as close to a 30 delta as possible, which would be right here just about at a $421 strike price, a 30 delta. Meaning that if the stock price goes from 411 to 421, you get to participate in all of that capital appreciation that occurs. But anything beyond 421, we would be capped on our capital appreciation. For the nerds out there, you can take a look at this document, which I have linked in the description, which is a full breakdown of exactly the methodology for how they calculate the BXMD returns. Essentially what they do here in breaking it down is they own the S&P 500, and on the third Friday of each month, that whatever the price of that option is, they buy it back, whether it's for a profit or a loss, and they write a new option 30 days out at a 30 delta. Now, I don't specifically utilize a 30-day out-of-the-money option in my strategies. There's a lot of different ways you can write options, but I feel like it's a pretty good foundational way to measure writing covered calls in a very hands-off way once a month and seeing how that strategy compares against just owning the S&P 500. Thankfully, we have historical returns going all the way back to 1986 to see just how this strategy compares. All right, we're on the index dashboard here, and I'll link to this website as well. And we'll go over here to performance. Here's the performance of this index all the way back to when it started right here in 1986. And right now it's just showing BXMD. So let's go ahead and add in the S&P 500, which we have to use SPX as opposed to SPY. And let's compare. Now, right now you'd be thinking, well, wait a minute, Joe, gray is SPX and gray wins, right? Well, hold on a second here. We're not comparing apples to apples. We're comparing SPX back to 1975 versus BXMD, which started in 1986. So that's not an apples to apples comparison. Let's adjust really quick. We have a fundamental shift in returns. Green, as you'll notice right here, is BXMD, and SPX is the S&P 500. And you'll notice here that there's not much difference here in the late 80s. But as we see here, we see significant changes, and this is overall percentage returns, right here in the 90s and the early 2000s. We have significant outperformance by quite a bit here in the mid-2000s. Here's the housing crisis right here. We get a little bit closer together. And then from there, we have significant outperformance from BXMD. Here's COVID right here. Didn't make a difference. Both of them climbed in very similar fashions. And what we have here is over that entire time frame, back to 1986, we have performance by the SPX of about 1,500% return, but BXMD has over a 3,000% return. For the record, that is 32 years of history showing that this strategy works better than just owning the index. But you might be thinking to yourself, Joe, this dates back to all the way when you were born, which it does, by the way. I was born in 1986. But you know what? Modern day returns are much different than what we saw back in the 80s and 90s, so this is really an apples to oranges comparison. What would it be like if we were to compare it to just maybe the last 20 years or 15 years instead of the last 32 years? Okay, let's go back to right here. This is from the mid-90s all the way there. We have still outperformance, though the returns are closer together. We have more like an 800% versus 500% returns, but still BXMD, the covered call index, is still beating the S&P 500 though. We have very similar returns here from about 2003 to current, and really the only time frame that the S&P 500 outperforms is right here, right before COVID, right around here. We'll go this 2018-ish. To now, which includes this big outperformance right here, which occurred during the COVID crash. They were essentially very close together, and the S&P 500 has outperformed since that time, although they did get pretty close together here in 2022. Now, the crash and the recovery that occurred during COVID may be very much representative of what we can expect in the future for crashes and recoveries, but honestly, it has no bearing on what we've experienced in the past. It was such a significant drop hard and a significant recovery that occurred right after that, not because the index actually improved necessarily, but mainly I think because the market was flooded with new cash. Remember all that stimulus money that a bunch of people got that didn't know what to do with, so they just invested in the market and blew up the QQQ and SPY during that time frame. That's really never happened in the past, and unlikely to expect that to happen every time in the future, flooding the markets with stimulus money every time there's a major crash. Now, can you do just fine with the S&P 500? Sure, but honestly, this is a very hands-off approach and monthly out-of-the-money options, when in reality, I think you can do much better by shortening the time frame for these and being more proactive when the options work in your favor. A few ways I would adjust to compare the results would be, number one, instead of writing monthly options, what if we wrote bi-weekly options or weekly options, or potentially even 2 to 3 day options at a time, where you're just absolutely going to capture more premium in that way than if you do just monthly options. Secondly, with the BuyWrite strategy, there's no proactive closing of the option early if the markets are moving in your favor. For example, if you write a 30-day out-of-the-money option in the BuyWrite index and the market drops, that option is worth very little, but in reality, if you're writing on the SPX, you can't really adjust that strategy. You just have to wait for that option to expire after 30 days. But if you write options on SPY and you write them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis and the market moves in your favor, you can close that option for a significant profit and write a whole new option. This doesn't mean that every investor should just go out there and start writing covered calls on their portfolio, but what it does mean is if you are skeptical of the idea that this strategy can work in the marketplace and outperform the S&P 500 index, then here's the proof. It's in the pudding. This strategy outperforms the index. If you want to see the ways that I personally write options with respect to the S&P 500 and in a more aggressive but also very conservative way, make sure to join the Patreon community. We've got a great group of investors over there, over 300 average Joe investors who use options in their own portfolio and those that just own dividend stocks. And it's a great community that helps each other learn, and become better investors. If you want to learn more about joining the Patreon community, check out the link in the description below. That's all I got for you guys in this video. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks for watching.